Welcome to USA Biz Party. I am Anna Scheller, your host. USA Biz Party is a Twitter chat that meets every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. What do we chat about? We chat about all things business. We talk about things that can help you grow your business, things that can help you as an entrepreneur, and even topics that might not seem directly related to entrepreneurship or business, but are definitely part of the whole person concept, like what do you do to take care of yourself? How do you relate to your family? Those things are also important as well. We want to ask you, if you're watching us on YouTube, please like and follow this broadcast. We really appreciate you subscribing to us. And today we have an extra special guest who has been with USA Biz Party. He's been part of USA Biz Party almost since its inception. And don't let this frighten you guys. He is a lawyer. He is a lawyer. We like him in spite of himself. I mean, in spite of being a lawyer. And he is not just a lawyer. He is a leadership expert. He's written the book, Sustained Leadership, WBS. What does WBS stand for? It stands for Work Breakdown Structure. Today, we asked Tom to join us and to discuss contracting. What is a contract? How does it help your business? What are the parts of a contract? And other topics related to contracting. So, Tom, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Well, let's dig right into our topic. So, everybody thinks to know what a contract is, and I know there are lots of ideas about contracts, but if you could just, in one or two sentences, this could be hard, I understand, but one or two sentences, can you tell us what exactly a contract is?
Certainly. Now, keep in mind, lawyers are paid by the word, which is why they speak and write so much. And so you may have to cut me off, and that's fine. But I can go on and on with the whole idea of contracts. I've been doing this pretty much my entire career. In my second year of law school, I was given an opportunity to intern with the U.S. Navy, and they taught me government contracting, which is a whole unique field of contracting in and of itself. And through my entire career, which has been years, I've of course grown my knowledge of those. And even in government contracting, the subcontracts are commercial contracts. They are not technically government contracts at all. And so my range and breadth of things that I've learned about contracting goes through the entire spectrum of such things. And when you ask what a contract is, essentially it is an agreement that the law will enforce. In other words, if someone says you agreed to do something and you didn't do it, I can sue you, I can make a claim, I can get restitution. And so if the law will enforce it, then you've got a contract. And this brings in a whole new dimension of things that people don't often think about, because some people will tell you, well, it's got to be in writing. Well, that's a good business practice. I won't argue that. But no, the law will enforce verbal contracts as well. So it is simply that. It's an agreement that the law will enforce, even if it's a verbal contract. The big issue there is going to be, how do you enforce it? How do you prove what the contract was?
So there are elements to a contract. What are those elements, Tom?
If you've ever taken a V-Law class, you've probably been taught there are 5 elements to a contract. And that includes offer, acceptance, consideration, capacity of the party, and lawful purpose. And very often when you hear offer and acceptance, you'll hear people phrase that as the meeting of the minds. In other words, two people reached an agreement. And this is where disputes and problems in contracting often arise, because one party believes they were crystal clear in explaining what they wanted, and the other party was crystal clear in what they were going to do. And then when it actually happens, they don't align very well. And so a large part of this is the management of expectations. When I teach contracting classes, what I'll often tell the contract managers is, your main mission in life is to bring certainty to the business transaction. And if you have not brought certainty to that transaction, you've kind of failed in your contracting obligation. And so you always look for that certainty, that clarity, the clear communication among the parties, so that all the expectations of everyone are met and the job that is desired is performed and done well.
So I like that certainty to the business transaction. So often it seems like there's not, and that's where disputes tend to arise when
Correct.
there are when work is being performed by parties. Earlier, I was talking about how I was working with a contractor for my business, and we have checklists for them to follow. And this contractor was reinterpreting my checklists. And even when I sat down and explained that the checklists were not to be interpreted, they're pretty clear. I expected the checklist to be followed as it was written. Then the individual proceeded to tell me how her way was better. At which point I realized I was certain, to bring certainty to the transaction, that she was not going to work out for me anymore. So let's talk a little bit about, I want to get to the scope of work because that's very important. But you mentioned that a verbal contract can be as enforceable as a written contract. How can that be?
Well, if you think about most of your business transactions, as simple as going to the grocery store, you don't sign a contract on your way in and say, well, I will buy these goods and you will sell me these goods and I will pay these. That's not what it is. You go in, you pick things off the shelf, you go to the cash register, they ring it up, you pay them money. That is a contract and it is fully performed, but there's no writing. There may be a receipt, and in some stores there may be a receipt, but there is always some record of the transaction. And if you have exchanges or returns, that receipt is simple enough to demonstrate that the parties understood that they had an agreement, they had a contract. And that's why I say the verbal contracts are fully enforceable. A receipt is good documentation. And whether or not you reduce your contract to writing, and of course, as a lawyer, I'm going to say, get the contracts in writing, get it in writing. You've heard that many times. Even though I say that, you should have at least some documentation that exhibits what you are agreeing to. It could be an exchange of emails. I don't encourage an exchange of texts, but I've seen it. You want to make sure that the parties, again, are managing the expectations among themselves and will perform what each other expects them to perform. What did the parties mean when they said this or wrote this or acted in this way? And this is where actions will speak much louder. The inspection will be this way. Well, if the inspection is conducted in a completely different way, and that's done over and over again, the court's going to say, wait a minute, I understand you agreed to this in writing, but that's not what you did. And so I'm going to enforce the contract based on what you did, how you acted. And even to the point that if the UCC, Uniform Commercial Code, which is the state law that governs these types of transactions, it says very clearly in there that a contract can be found to exist, even if it is uncertain of the moment of its making. In other words, we look back in history and say, well, when did you agree to this? Doesn't matter. What matters is at some point you acted like you had a contract. The courts are going to say, that's a contract. We're going to enforce it.
So it makes me think of some of the property codes, particularly in Texas where I live, that state that, so a lot of times landlords will let people move in. They have more of a verbal contract than anything. And then, of course, everything's going fine until the person decides they have to leave or there's a disagreement or a dispute of sorts. And then, and so then let's say that the tenant, there's a disagreement and the tenant starts being late on their rent. And the first late, the guy says, I'll forgive it. And then the second late, he doesn't want to be the bad guy. And then before you know it, now he's frustrated and he's angry because he's not getting the rent on time. So he takes his lease to court, and the judge says, you didn't ask for the late fees, so this is not a valid point in your agreement. Is that the kind of thing we're talking about?
It's an excellent example of this very thing, that you're deemed to have waived whatever you wrote because you didn't act that way. You didn't enforce it. And so, yes, you can lose your rights. And again, it introduces that level of uncertainty of, well, are the late fees due or are they not?
All elements have a scope of work. Can you help us understand? I mean, I think I know what that is. Basically, Tom, I'm asking you to do X, Y, and Z, and you say yes. That would be a scope of work.
Yes, and there are any number of ways to do this. Sometimes they're very formal. Sometimes they are what we call performance work statements. Say, I want the trash taken out every day. And your expectation then is that the contractor will come in every day and take the trash out. But in an office environment, maybe once a week is enough. In a kitchen environment, it's got to be every day. And so you want to make sure that you've got the specifics of what you want done. Now, for the small business, solo entrepreneur, et cetera, when they begin to delegate these tasks to subcontractors, they want to make sure that it's clear what your expectation is and what you want them to get done. And so you would write out the process or the procedure. Now, Anna gave the example a moment ago of a checklist. And the instructions were follow the checklist. Don't interpret it. Don't deviate from it. Don't, make different standards. Follow the checklist. And that's very clear. In many cases, if you've come from a corporate background, you're familiar with the infamous policies and procedures. And sometimes when you want to delegate a task to a subcontractor, you can simply write down the way you've always done it and say, this is what I want you to do. Step 1, step 2, step 3, or a flow chart, or, any number of tools that will define the means, methods, the processes of accomplishing it. On the other hand, if I were to hire I've done this, I hire a web expert. I say, build me a web page. It's beyond me. I could not possibly perform that task. So I delegated. And very often they'll go back and say, well, do you want this or do you want that? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't do that. I want something customers will come to. So this is a case where I'm not saying, okay, I want this image here and that image there. And I'm not that particular about it. I say, make it look good. Make it bring customers into my business. And in that way, I'm relying on them to do it. And it would be just totally inappropriate for me to say, now, I want you to emphasize these SEO points on. Well, granted, I have to give content and they have to massage it in to make it look pretty on the web. But the point is, the way you define the work will vary tremendously depending on the skill levels of the respective parties and whether you are relying on their expertise, their professionalism to be integrated into the process. If I want a new bathroom built out, you may go to somebody and say, build out the bathroom or build me a deck, and they'll do drawings and you'll approve them, and then they build to that specification. And if it's built to the specification, once you've approved it, they've met their obligation. And you say, well, I don't like it. The tile is a different color than I expected. Well, why did you expect that? It's the tile that was specified. And so that scope of work becomes critically important to every contract, whether it's written or not, in terms of what is the party actually obligated to do. There's a concept in every contract known as good faith and fair dealing. And there's also under the commercial code, UCC, this idea of a warranty of merchantability and fitness for a particular purpose. There's these different warranties that can fit in there. And so if I say, build me a bathroom and they build an aquarium, a full room aquarium, and you're like, that's not really a bathroom. And you say, well, it is for the fish. And it's like, no, there's this sense of reasonableness that goes with all of this to say, I expect it to work like a bathroom. And so, yes, whether it's codes or rules, restrictions, permits, you expect the party to be responsible and perform professionally. And so, again, does all that have to be written down? Not always, but sometimes, yes. And this is where the agreement of the parties becomes so important. And the documentation, even if not a signed agreement, the documentation is, I asked them to do this. We talked about this. I mentioned the need for permits. They mentioned the need for my approval on the specs before a permit could be given, and you have that all written down and you say, okay, that's our expectation now. This is how the work will proceed.
And of course, things can change as you go, but it's always wise to document those changes so that if there is a dispute, which when there are two people working together, there is a likelihood of disagreement or dispute, then at that point, we have to look at, okay, where did we deviate from the contract, and did we, because he said, I love to watch the criminal shows in the courthouses, and one of the big objections that comes up is that's hearsay. And so on the one hand, you want to make sure you don't want to document down to the penny. Well, maybe you do, but you don't want documentation to become a sore spot in a relationship on the one hand. But on the other hand, you do want to make sure that both parties are in agreement as to any changes that can happen. And so I think that's real important.